Hello, beautiful community. We're going to do a little quick episode today on the UK general election as been called by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for the 4th of July. Now, only about 15%, 10 to 15% of our audience is Brit. So lots of love to all of you in the UK. I'm speaking to you here from East London. But I'll make this brief chat accessible to everybody around the world by trying to frame it in terms of general issues. When a general election is called, when any major election, national election is called, in a period of history when we're struggling with trust, and we're really struggling with trust, two bad things happen. Individual politicians tighten message discipline, and political parties settle even more into being election-winning machines. Because we're in an age of distrust in institutions, it's more important than ever that politicians are transparently thoughtful in public, as opposed to reciting talking points that may have worked in 1999, And therefore, in this historical moment, this will stay true for a couple of decades at least, it's much more corrosive for the entire political system when message discipline of politicians is absurdly tight, because it just don't sound human. And not sounding human is horrendous in a moment when your citizens feel unsafe, powerless, betrayed, and worst of all, they experience the entire political arena as an opaque space they can't make sense of. And then when parties act like winning machines, they give the impression, especially to the younger generation, of being instrumental, perfunctory enterprises that are at a huge distance from thinking about the world, thinking about what change in the country might mean, thinking about political ideas, thinking about challenges that are thorny and insoluble but are really important to reflect on. So all of that excitement that is to do with political transformation, again, just sort of rigidifies at a period of election time even more than it is rigidified all the rest of the time, which is extremely rigidified. Moreover, no major political party really in the UK is either systematically thinking about restoration of trust or openly talking about restoration of trust. And that's again something that for me is now always at least a top 10 issue if you're trying to ethically run and indeed effectively win an election. You've got to talk to your citizens about why they should trust you and why they should trust you in terms of you, the individual, and you in terms of institutions you stand for and represent. That's very, very important. And this is not easy because you want to potentially accommodate some populist sensibilities. That's to say, speaking a little bit more than was the case in the past, in a way that is kitchen table accessible. So bridging the generalized discourse, right? That's to do with the way modern state justifies things to itself, and just taking that a little bit more in the kitchen table chat direction. That's important in the moment of crisis of trust. But the challenge is that virtually all politicians who do that manipulatively. And sometimes you might say then, well, is there no healthy room for populism? Because every time anybody tries populism, it risks culminating in an unconstructive pattern. But I do think that certain populist features remain normatively impeccable. but you've got to balance them with sacred respect for certain kinds of democratic ritual and counter-majoritarian institutions in a democracy. So all the major parties in the UK are to a certain extent in crisis. Some of them are more transparent about the crisis they're experiencing, others are less transparent about it. The Labour Party slogan, and the Labour Party will be the winner of the general election and will get a majority almost certainly, just a question of how big. The slogan of Labour is change and stability, and really stability through change, which really means not the old guys, let's get the old guys out, let's get the Conservative Party out because they're useless. And then we'll have stability. The level of detail the Labour Party are bringing to the table and the level of summarization of the detail they're bringing, both, are really poor by historical terms. And instinctively the country feels that the Labour Party is not ready for government. Now you might feel that you dislike a party that's about to come to power, but you could feel, well, no, they're up to the job. They might not do the job I want done, but whatever they are going to do, they're going to be really good, really competent at it. And the Labour Party doesn't feel like that, nor does it inspire great confidence in British citizens toward their concrete proposals. In other words, Brits, speaking crudely, don't know what the hell the Labour Party stands for. They don't know what the hell it's going to do. This is unfair if taken literally, but that's the cartoonish summary. A part of this is the age-old crisis of identity the UK Labour Party has lived through, whereby it has never historically categorized what New Labour, the Tony Blair period in particular, was all about for them, and hasn't clearly articulated to what extent they're a different animal to that animal. So that extraordinarily successful and fairly recent bit of Labour Party history, the party as a whole altogether too much relates to as though it's a kind of relationship that you've had in the past that you don't speak about. So it's a kind of a buried identity crisis. One bit of its past that this version of the Labour Party is articulate about is the period when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party quite recently. And this Labour Party is saying, we have got beyond Corbyn and we have taken the party away from his kind of politics and drawn a clear line, so that they have a message about that. But what their message is about the Blair years, we don't know. And I'm saying that's an expression of a crisis of identity. The Tories are out of gas, and they've reached a point where they're not audible, right? You say things, but the country stopped listening. It's quite an extraordinary thing for the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to have called an election for July, because on most counts I can think of where they could edge an advantage to minimize the scale of their defeat, they'd probably have done better in autumn than in the summer. On most measures of the economy, on their immigration policy, I think they could have squeezed out more electoral juice in autumn than now. So it's a particularly strange decision that would be befuddling most Tory MPs and indeed much of the Tory cabinet. And so it's worth asking whether there is an element there, it's hard to believe that there could be, but whether there is an element there of just the Prime Minister thinking he's run out of gas and he wants out. The Scottish Nationalist Party is in a big crisis. The Green Party is struggling in many ways. The exclusionary populist right party, Reform, also is facing challenges. And then the Liberal Democrat Party has sort of evacuated itself from national politics. It's trying to fight local constituency battles, win particular seats, but it has spectacularly exited from having a message for the country in a way that is utterly extraordinary. Ukraine is not a significant electoral issue. Gaza is to some extent, and could be an issue that hurts Labour more than it looks like it will at this point if something horrific happens that Israel does in Gaza, to which the Labour leader Keir Starmer responds in a way the population will find inadequate, and certainly Labour supporters will find inadequate, and in particular Labour's Muslim support will find inadequate. That could hurt Labour at the level of turnout. Once they lose, the Tories, Conservative Party, will face a choice about whether they say we've lost because we didn't do exclusionary post-truth populism enough, or because they weren't centrist enough. So there'll be an interesting choice for the Tories that will be between clearly seeing themselves as a constitutional centre-right party or drifting a little bit in a post-truth populist right direction. And that's why I find it difficult to predict who the next leader would be, because that crossroads is going to be a central crossroads for the Conservative Party here. And this is ubiquitous, really, across the West, that right parties are facing this fork and will be facing this fork for the years and decades to come. The prognosis for the UK is rather bleak for the years to come, but there's always a possibility to do better. But the sort of default position is the Tories enter a deep crisis of identity. Labour wins power, stays in power, but roughly speaking fails, enters another crisis of identity, maybe a re-expression of underlying crises of identity in the party. Maybe electoral reform occurs. That also won't fix the country's problems. And then anti-democratic authoritarians will circle power. That's the default. That's where the country is moving over the next decade. But there are plenty of opportunities to get at least in part, off that track. And quite certain the next government will be hoping they're going to make a contribution to that. And we shall see. So that's my brief take. Lots of love. I'll be with you tomorrow. I wasn't planning to be, but a medical procedure I was doing got cancelled. So I'll be with you tomorrow to talk about the Ukraine war. Lots of love.